Welcome to the Ketogeek podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Ketogeek podcast. I am your host, Fahad again, and you can find me on Instagram at FAHADAKG. Guys, there's a lot of stuff that's going on over here at Ketogeek, and since we're a massive family with so much content on every single social media platform, I'm just going to run down real quick what's going on and what to expect and how to keep in touch with our entire network or ecosystem. So first of all, we're going to be taking a more active role on YouTube where we will create some short videos and guides for our products. So you can subscribe to the Ketogeek channel on YouTube now. On Instagram, it's just a fun sort of interactive visual experience that we have with a lot of people who enjoy our product and all the content that we post. And we will be doing giveaways and live streams there as well, starting from next week. So follow us on Ketogeek Instagram, which is KETO_GEEK. It's a lot of fun stuff, and if you have been checking out some of our stories, we totally nerd out with Kylo Ren snippets, Harry Potter jokes, and all that kind of goofy stuff. It's a lot of fun. On Twitter, we are busy bashing heads with experts and sharing a lot of our information that comes out, a lot of research work that we're working on. And so it's a much more educational platform for everybody if they want to follow us. If you don't want to deal with all of this madness and just want a simple dose of everything condensed into one email, then you can sign up for our newsletter. And you will also get access to some of our special email exclusive sales and discounts and a lot of really cool content. I manage the newsletter myself, so everything is not automated. At least the newsletter isn't automated, and you will be in touch with me directly through that. So go sign up for the newsletter, and we will be sending one every Monday from this point onward. Another great news is that our Ketogeek Chocolate Fudge Energy Pod now has some really new kick-ass boxes and new packaging, which looks really legit. And now you can put it at your workplace and brag about it on Instagram at the same time. Kind of cool, isn't it? Make your coworkers jealous. In January, we will be goofing around and celebrating something called the World Carnivore Month, which Sean Baker and the Carnivores of the Apocalypse, those guys are celebrating, and we are just going to join in and bash some of the myths that have been created against food, nutrition, and meat in general. So keep an eye out on that. Our Twitter is going to get really interesting starting January 1st, so follow us there. Besides that, we have been working on the Nutty Carnivore Write-Up, which is one of the food and diet plan that many of us have been following for the past 5 to 6 months. It's a very simplistic diet, which takes a carnivorous framework and applies a little bit of stuff on top of it. I'm also currently writing an ebook about it, doing a lot of research on the carnivorous way of eating, in touch with a lot of experts. And this diet is meant to simplify everything while giving you the best health results that are possible on a diet. So it's a very strategic and interesting way of eating. More information will be coming soon. And speaking of simplicity, today's guest is Lawrence Neal, and he's all about simplicity and efficiency. He has his own podcast where he has interviewed some great minds like Rob Wolf, Mark Sisson, Ben Greenfield. And so instead of having all of these guys show up to our podcast, jokes, by the way, I would love to have them, we decided to go with the great man himself and tap out all the knowledge he has to share with us as far as training is concerned. And just to give you guys a little bit of an introduction, Lawrence is the founder of the Corporate Warrior, which is a high-intensity training and HIT business podcast and a blog. He has interviewed over 90 world-class health and fitness, high-intensity training fitness business experts to discover the tactics and strategies they use to optimize success in both health and business. Lawrence had an 8-year-long career in B2B technology sales, selling complex IT solutions to businesses. After reading the book, Body by Science, Lawrence embraced time-efficient, high-intensity training to achieve his results and goals and to free up time to invest in his career and side businesses. I like this guy. You know, it's all about efficiency, and I'm one of those people who enjoys being efficient and just focusing on dreams and passions. Anyway, let's get back. So this lifestyle and change enable Lawrence to close many multi-million-pound business deals and grow a successful high-intensity training podcast called Corporate Warrior. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring to you Lawrence Neal of Corporate Warrior. Hello, everyone. We have Lawrence Neal on board with us on the Ketogeek podcast. Lawrence, the introduction is probably already done, so let's... and you know what? My first question is going to be different for you because everybody else has been an educator. You're an entrepreneur. So, first question.
I'll try and be both.
Okay. Educator, entrepreneur. So, what was the problem? What happened? What brought you to this world? Give me your story.
Great question, actually. I'm going to steal that for my own podcast. Great question. So many years ago, I was working in London in the UK. So I was living in a town called Wimbledon. And, it was my first kind of big opportunity following university. Everyone in the UK moved, a lot of people in the UK moved to London for opportunity. And I did that, and I landed a pretty good job in IT sort of technology, business to business sales. And I, at the same time, I'd kind of got really into my health and fitness. And I very much followed the high volume, high frequency approach to training. So I was exercising about 8 to 10 times a week, sometimes twice a day, a whole mixture of things. So sometimes strength training or long distance running or kind of short distance running and high intensity interval training and all sorts of things. And I always had this passion to start my own business. And I found that really hard when all I seemed to be doing was either exercising or working for my employer. Because I was also very determined to be successful there and then use that as leverage to do my own thing in terms of financial investment, but also just experience and skills. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't find the time to build my own business because I just had no time. And that also meant that my relationship suffered. I didn't really have any steady girlfriends. My friendship suffered as well. And my health suffered because I was overtrained. I was just exercising so much that I was far too lean, didn't have a great deal of muscle mass. And the diet I was on was a bit crazy as well during the whole adventure. So I felt very hungry a lot of the time. It was a very fruit orientated diet. So then after a few years of living in London, I then stumbled across a video on YouTube which really changed everything. And that was a presentation by Dr. Doug McGuff on the 21 convention. And Doug McGuff is now quite well known for his book, Body by Science, which is a great introduction to high intensity strength training. I watched that video, had never heard someone articulate exercise in the way that he did, and it just changed the way I looked at what I was doing. I immediately went out and bought Body by Science, read it in probably 2 days, started implementing it immediately. And this is going to sound pretty controversial, but I pretty much reduced my training schedule from 8 to 10 sessions a week to once a week, and it would only last me 15 minutes, not because I was being lazy, but because the fatigue that you accrue through doing high intensity strength training is so severe in terms of muscle fatigue, and it's safe. Probably severe is the wrong word, but you build up a lot of fatigue that you can't actually do any more work because you're so tired. And then obviously you need time to recover from that stress and that stimulus. So this was really profound because suddenly I had all this time back. I could, I was getting the same, if not better, results than before. So I was gaining and retaining muscle mass. I felt great. I had lots of energy, and I suddenly had all this time where I could focus on my other interests. And then that gave me the ability and the time to really focus on my blog and podcast, which is called Corporate Warrior. And that focuses on health, business, and time optimization. So obviously that's kind of exploring and sharing, what I've learned in terms of, exercise and how to make that more effective and efficient. And then that trend has expanded through every area of my life, and to try and find where I can be as effective and efficient as possible in lots of different areas. So business is obviously one of those, and also just general life hacking. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, and it's very important to note over here that not everybody can expend tremendous amount of time at the gym or at the CrossFit box or wherever they're going. In fact, a lot of people are pretty much against working out, or they don't know how to start, and they have these issues that don't allow them to do intense workouts for hours and hours, especially if you have 8 to 12 hour work days, if you're leading a company. So people like yourself are pretty important there. So why do you think people spend that much time in these big hour training sessions? Is it the community aspect that intrigues them, or is it just that, I need to work hard and it'll give me more results? So what's your take on that?
That's a great question. I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a well-known saying in kind of fitness industry, which is that the fitness industry complicates to profit. It makes all of these different aspects of looking after one's health very, very complicated, and then turns them into a complicated product or service that you have to pay for. And I think actually it's far, far simpler than most people realize. So that's the first thing. So a lot of people think you have to do all these complicated routines and exercises and protocols in order to achieve good health, but that's just not what. If anyone who's really looked into the scientific literature around what causes how exercise stimulates the body to improve it, it's just not true. Put in very simple terms, really the most potent form of exercise we can really do is resistance training or strength training. And I like high intensity training because it's very efficient. And all of the other things you see are just nowhere near as effective in terms of stimulating most improvements in the body. Now, I'm deviating off the question a little bit, but so the thing you said about community, that's definitely true. So I think fitness has become an event for a lot of people, and that's not a bad thing. I play basketball once a week, and I do that for an hour every week, and I love that. And I suppose it is exercise, but I don't really consider it exercise because strength training is, as I said, far more effective. So for me, it's really more of a recreational activity. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, you were saying most people can't find all this time to exercise. They think they need several hours per week. And that's, again, down to the industry, right? The industry is the media, the magazines. It's all telling people that they need to invest all of this time in optimizing their health. And it's just simply not true. And there's this thing called the Rocky Balboa syndrome, which essentially is this whole more is better philosophy. We see it in the workplace. We see people being busy for busy sake, work's sake, and not necessarily being more productive. Exactly the same in exercise. Most people in the gym, they're doing multiple, sometimes redundant sets on exercises. They're sitting on, they're sitting there between workouts, between exercises on their mobile phone. They're not being very productive in the gym. And if you look at it if you look at your exercise in terms of how you can optimize it for productivity, it changes everything. And then exactly what you need to do and how how small the amount of time you need to invest to achieve the outcome you want. So yeah, I think it's just it's a mindset thing, and it's an education. I think it's a re-education that most people require. They need to understand, okay, so when I go for a run or when I lift a weight, what happens to my body? What am I trying to achieve? Fahad, probably as well as I do, that exercise doesn't really burn that many calories, Mm-hmm. And a lot of people still think that exercise is a fantastic way to burn body fat, and it's just not. Don't get wrong, it does burn some calories, and it certainly makes fat loss more permissive, but diet is far more important for that. So yeah.
So I lead this life. I don't mention it commonly or publicly, but it's the modern renaissance, whatever the pronunciation is, sort of lifestyle where I'm good at many things, but I'm not really great at anything, really, to be honest. So do you think this is going to be the modern lifestyle choice in the future, considering that everyone now has access to scientific literature, like workout routines, and are we going to see less work, but more intense work at workplaces? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's like you kind of embrace the whole generalization approach, being a generalist as opposed to, is that correct? Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think, I think so much time is wasted, so much time in just stuff that doesn't really make much of a difference. I mean, again, exactly what I was just saying, like exercise doesn't have to be this hour a day slog. It can be an incredibly effective and efficient use of one's time, just like work can. I follow the kind of most important task approach to my work, and I try and get the most important task done in the first 2 to 3 hours of the day. And if I've done that and I've done it successfully, then I feel pretty productive about my day, and I know that actually I'm going to be more productive than the majority of people just by following that type of discipline. It just takes I think everyone needs to kind of figure out what that that key task is that's going to really push their business forward. Obviously, Tim Ferriss talks about this at length. But yeah, I see that. So I see that in health. I see it in business. I guess I've not necessarily thought about it in terms of the wider context as much. I don't know, where else would you apply that, do you think, in your life?
Well, I was just thinking how people are getting replaced with apps quite a bit, and with machine learning right on the horizon for us. So that was what I was trying to project in the future is, everything's just, you don't really need to be a specialist in many things. But if you can create bridges between several different apps or technologies or lifestyles, then maybe you can create patterns on your path in life. That's where I was sort of going with this. So do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think I know what you mean. Well, the way I interpret that is obviously life's so interesting now in that, we have services at our fingertips via a variety of different apps to achieve all sorts of different outcomes that we want. And obviously not just apps, but just like web services in general. I mean, Fiverr, for instance, is such an awesome service for just pretty much outsourcing any aspect of your business. Very, very affordably. And I think, in the context of starting a new business, I think you're right, if I've interpreted this right, in terms of there's massive opportunities for people who only perhaps need to be good at, one thing. And then they can then just link up these other apps and these other services to really build some kind of unique company, if that's what you mean. So I'm kind of on board with that.
Yeah, so let's go back to the 15-minute HIT workout style that you have. So what's it all about? What does it entail? Would you like to give a little bit of a brief informational packet to the people that are listening? Sure.
So HIT stands for high intensity training or high intensity strength training. I'm just a messenger. I'm someone who's very passionate about it. I learned about it probably 6 or 7 years ago, but it's actually been about since the kind of 70s and 80s in terms of the coining of high intensity training, which came from a chap called Arthur Jones, who was an inventor and the founder of Nautilus, which is a very well-known exercise brand today. Now, high-intensity training is very misunderstood because, quite often I'll say to someone, they'll say, "Oh, what do you do?" I say, "Oh, I do a podcast on high-intensity training," and they say, "Oh, I do that," and I'm like, "You probably don't." Like, high-intensity training has been so it's so cliche and overused now that it's come to mean lots of different exercise modalities. So like, I think P90X stole it back in the day and Insanity, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it becomes difficult to promote what I term and what a lot of my sort of community term as high intensity training when all these other things are coming under the same umbrella. And so a lot of people like to call what I'm about to describe evidence-based exercise is another way of saying it. So it can be quite difficult with all the semantics. But essentially, the type of high-intensity training that I practice and I talk about in my podcast all the time is strength training typically performed with a moderate to heavy load, can be done with free weights, body weight, or machines. And it's typically done with a single set to failure, so single set to muscular failure, and normally performed relatively slowly if you compare it to kind of the more traditional strength training methods. So not necessarily super slow, but a cadence or repetition speed might be 4 seconds up, 4 seconds down, for example. And typically these workouts are performed normally 5 to maybe 10 exercises. And again, this is the typical routine. Obviously, there are some variation. Exercises normally performed one after the other with very minimal rest, if any, between them. And typically, one's high-intensity training regime is probably only going to consist of 2, maximum 3 workouts per week. Some people will do once a week. And the point of that is because it's so intense and tiring that most people require several days of recovery following a workout to recover. And, I certainly believe that when it comes to the adaptations and improvements we're looking for, such as muscle mass, strength, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and so on, that you don't really need much more stimulus beyond 1 or 2 sessions a week, so long as you're working with a high amount of effort. And if anyone wants to find out more about this, because sometimes it'd be quite hard to describe it in words, I would just buy or Body by Science or type high intensity training Big 5 into YouTube, and you'll see Dr. Doug McGuff demonstrating the Big 5 workout, which is a pull down, like a lat pull down, chest press, seated row, overhead press, and leg press. And you'll see what I mean by how intense it is. But rest assured, it's very safe. It's very safe on the joints. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's the workout. And it typically takes, if you're doing it right and you're not wasting time, it should be done in 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, so I think a lot of companies or different organizations could benefit from this sort of methodology. Do you offer that to people in general? If they come up to you, let's say Google comes up to you and says, "Hey, we want all our employees to get into the HIT style training or have something at the workplace," could you tailor something for them?
That's a great suggestion. I certainly could, and I haven't had that request yet. I'm waiting for it. No. So I am in talks with one person, one friend of mine, who's a very well-established high-intensity trainer in the UK, in London, and he works with CEOs directly, sort of one-to-one, helping them with improving body composition by using high-intensity training and sort of dietary methods. And he is interested in introducing this kind of thing to corporate wellness. It's not something I've ever have any experience in, but I mean, I haven't done it, but I know that it would be very successful in terms of, a very productive way to get, workers, for want of a better label, far fitter and healthier in a very efficient time, so they can then obviously go back to focusing on being productive in the workplace. So yeah, I am talking to someone about that, and we may launch some kind of initiative targeting those types of organizations. But not had any inbound, so to speak, on that one yet. But no, certainly would be useful to them.
Yeah, and I would really push this forward because a lot of people spend so many hours, and if the results can be achieved through simplified methods, then and in a very concise time frame, then I would totally back that up because. As we were talking before the podcast, that the modern currency is freedom. People work 80 hours straight and then they come home and, let's go to the gym for another 1 hour, 2 hours. And because my trainer told me to do that. So if you can cut that all short and they can spend more time with their loved ones, that is gold, man. So question for you, man. What kind of resources do you use? Is there any scientific literature or website you go to? Any gurus you follow, or any experience you have? Anything?
No, I just also want to add to your last point. It's just mad, isn't it? Like I don't know how much you know about this. I know you've obviously researched my site, my podcast, but I still cannot believe how few people practice or know about this way of exercising. It's mad. It's mad to me, and I feel motivated to want to do a better job to just promote it and be a better messenger. But to your question, there's some fantastic resources out there. I would definitely start people with Body by Science, which I've already mentioned, in terms of the first book people purchase. There's also a YouTube video by Dr. Doug McGuff. If you just type Dr. Doug McGuff, McGuff, and the 21 Convention, which is a sort of a conference for self-improvement for men. It's a fantastic speech, and Doug's got a way of communicating which is unlike a lot of people in the fitness industry, which is quite compelling. In terms of other resources, if you search Mike Mentzer, Mikementzer, Mike Mentzer is a very famous bodybuilder, and he made high intensity training quite popular because he had a very impressive physique. Obviously, that was pretty much all down to genetics, but he was able to use the principles of high intensity training to build a great body for the Mr. Olympia contests or Mr. America or one of those. So he's become very famous for his low volume and low frequency approach to that. So he's got a book called The Mike Mentzer Way. I wouldn't want to overwhelm people because I think it's better to leave just a few resources to get people started. Mm-hmm. If you want to go deep, I would buy, and I promise you I don't earn any sort of commission for Doug, although I probably helped sell a ton of his books. But I would also suggest people buy the Body by Science question and answer book, which is a great book if you're really geeky and interested in exercise and knowing a lot. So when you read Body by Science, you'll probably have more questions. And this book is like an FAQ. So you'll be able to go through the book and see a lot of frequently asked questions from people like, how do I optimize muscle gain? How do I build strength? Can this work for athletes? All this type of thing. But it's also a wonderful book if you're a personal trainer because you can use it as a reference in your business when trying to help people if you specialize in this type of exercise. So yeah, that's where I would send people first.
Awesome. So is there anything else that you would upgrade or incorporate further down the road to your style? Like, for example, meditation of any sort? I know something like Headspace, similar to that. Something like, I don't know. Is there anything else you would add to this?
Well, what in terms of an overall way to look after someone's health or improve someone's overall health, do you mean? Yeah,
basically, how would you improve this further if you would like to? So, yeah, that would be my question.
Well, I think meditation's great. I don't currently meditate. I have had my spells of trying meditation. So I did the Headspace thing for 10 days. And I can see value in it. I'm just not very good at doing it, if I'm totally honest.
I agree.
But I do want to test the waters again in terms of meditation because it does seem to be, from what I'm hearing and kind of partially experienced this, it seems to just chill you out a lot, and it seems to make you far more it seems to make you much more calm so that you don't flip off the handle when you're met with a new stressor. That seems to be one of the true kind of benefits of meditation. Just you're able to just react better to everyday challenges. So there's that. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to meditate, or at least give it a go. But in terms of like an overall, things that people should think about from a health and fitness perspective, I don't necessarily think everyone has to do high intensity strength training. I just think once someone explores it and they compare it to other resistance training approaches, they'll see what I mean by the efficiency, and that attracts a lot of people. I have had people try high intensity training and then go, I just like being in the gym all the time, so I prefer my more high volume approach. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. If you enjoy that, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But I do think people should try it out, and I do think everyone should be investing time in some kind of safe resistance training on a week or twice weekly basis, at least. I shouldn't say at least, but it's once or twice weekly is so long as people are putting enough effort into it. And frequent movement. I think frequent movement is really, really important. I think if you're static, don't care if you've got a standing desk or you're sitting, just being in a static position for too long, I think is detrimental. So I think we should be trying to break up our still positions every hour by creating a kind of lifestyle that kind of forces you to move every hour or so. I like to sit just as much as the next person, especially if I'm really focusing on some challenging work. I like to sit. I'll only do standing desk work if it's really mundane. If it's like, let's say mundane, like email or something that resembles almost like a data entry task. I think sleep's super important. So getting 8 hours of high quality sleep, trying to make your room as pitch dark as possible. So I think that's key. But this is the thing, I often return to a simple heuristic when I think about health and fitness. I think, obviously I know that you're very focused on low carb, kind of ketogenic approach. I so happen tend to eat a pretty low carb diet. Although that's more because I focus on nutrient density and high protein, which automatically turns into a low carb diet, as you know, if you're eating a lot of steak and things like that. So the general heuristic that I often return to is, whenever I get confused about new research or literature that surfaces about health and fitness, is this: it's lift heavy things once or twice a week, move all the time, eat whole food that is nutrient dense as often as possible, and sleep 8 hours. Like that's kind of my go-to heuristic when I get too confused. And I think that's a good set of principles to follow.
And you've hit the nail on a really important philosophy that we also try to project here in our community, is try to take the science. It's good to know the general or the deep scientific literature, but if it can't distill itself into simplified concepts that you can replicate in simple go-to actions, then it's not that practical. So that's where I totally agree with you. Let's reduce it down so that we can create a much bigger impact. So yeah, anything else you want to add here?
On that topic, I would also say if you want to follow someone who, in terms of resources, I recently had Dr. Brad Schoenfeld on my podcast, who's actually more, he's not necessarily a huge high intensity training advocate. He's not against high intensity training, but yeah, he believes that if your goal is to optimize muscle gain, then other approaches are more effective. But I had him on my show because I keep an open mind and I like to have that debate. But the reason I bring him up is he will post on his Facebook very useful heuristics, such as the one I just mentioned, which I don't think anyone's posted that. I think that's one I just kind of made up. But he posted one recently about fat loss. And I can't remember exactly what the heuristic was, but it was like, target this much protein. And then it was like 4 bullet points, and I just think that's great. Like that is just, and it was very, it was all underpinned by, he's a leading researcher. So it was all underpinned by literature. So I think they're very useful for people that haven't got the time to dig into all of the science. I think people should, read this stuff where they can, but heuristics are useful. So yeah, I encourage people to go to Brad Schoenfeld's Facebook page.
Awesome. So we've already talked a little bit about sleep and the fact that corporations or workplaces can be very stagnant for people. Is there anything else that you think you could point out that people on a regular day are missing out on, or they're neglecting at their workplace, which may be detrimental to their physique or well-being?
I think I've covered it obviously quite a bit, but I think, diet is obviously very important.
Oh yeah.
I think, as you know, so yeah, I think, I used to work in B2B IT sales, and there was always junk food, available and, in the office. And I think that's one of the most challenging things is that when you work in an office or for someone else, you don't really have much control over the environment. And I think one of the biggest things that leads to people falling off the wagon or gaining a lot of excess body fat is having bad food in their environment. Because I think anyone who's checked out, I don't know if you've been following Stefan Guyanet, I think is his name. He's a leading sort of neuroscience guy that looks at neuroscience and obesity. And he's brilliant. And he did was on a podcast recently talking about, how our brain is wired for a different time, and how actually our brain is really the problem when it comes to diet and overeating. And I think one of the things I say to people and my clients is, a big step forward in terms of reaching your health goals, and certainly from a body composition perspective, is to just get rid of all the junk food from your house. Just take it out of all the cupboards, throw it in the bin, get rid of it. If you're going to have junk food, be strategic about it. Eat out, on that day, or you have your designated cheat day or whatever it is, or order in. But then as soon as you're finished, throw it away. I honestly think that's a huge thing that gets overlooked. Is people have fantastic intentions, and they're very good at predicting their present selves, but they're really, really bad, and I'm included, at predicting their future selves, because they think they have more willpower than they actually will have. And as I assume you probably know this, we only have a finite amount of willpower every day. We can get decision fatigue if we're making too many decisions. And when you come home after a stressful day at work, if you've used a lot of your willpower up, you're very, very inclined and very likely to eat a snack if it's at hand. So bringing this back to the office, I just think if you can try and cultivate a healthy environment in your office or your place of work, that's important, and try and encourage that among your colleagues. The second piece of advice I would say is, if you want to get into shape and you want to stay healthy, I think it's important to get used to pick certain foods that are healthy, that to be healthy, but that you enjoy eating regularly, and then literally repeat the same meals all of the time. When I lived in London, I was on a good income, so I could justify having Chipotle for lunch every single day. And what I used to do, and you'll love this because I think you and I are kind of similar when it comes to, productive life hacks, is I used to pre-order my Chipotle every day. So every day at 1 p.m., I would have exactly the same configuration. So there's, barbacoa, veg, and guacamole and what have you. And then I would collect it exactly the same time. I would walk past this queue of about 40 people, walk straight up to the till, get my Chipotle and go back to the office. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't use any of those precious willpower points on my lunch, and I could use those for strategic decisions within my job. And I was very satisfied and full from what was a fairly high protein, fairly moderate to high fat meal, which meant that I didn't have cravings for a lot of the crap that was around me. So I think that's the thing. I think getting on top of your diet, if you're in a workplace that's got a lot of temptation around, I think is a really critical thing to address in terms of optimizing one's health, for sure. Yeah.
Do you think many people are working way too many hours? Do we need to cut down the amount of hours that people spend at their workplace? Is there diminishing returns on productivity? Have you looked into all of that?
Oh, for sure. I haven't looked into necessarily the research, but I just think it's self-evident, if you look at what most people do all day, it's not necessarily that productive. Like, how much time do people actually spend doing something productive? Because in my experience, working in corporate world for almost 10 years, I just think most people they're chatting, they're making coffee, they're checking email, they're doing unproductive work to avoid high impact, uncomfortable work. And so, we have these arbitrary 8-hour days. I don't know if it's as well. I assume it probably is the same in the US. But in the UK, everyone's kind of 9 to 5. And my understanding is that kind of came from way back in the day. And it was kind of an arbitrary measure that was kind of established, and I believe with like factory workers and things like that. And it's just totally is that. It's just arbitrary. It no longer serves a purpose, really, especially in the information age. If you're an information worker, your hours and productivity should be measured by your ability to reach and hit your KPIs and your personal key performance indicators. And that doesn't, time spent working doesn't equal productivity. It's what you do in those hours. I quote Tim Ferriss. It's not how you. What does he say? It's not. I'm not even gonna try because I'll butcher it. But it's not how you're doing stuff. It's what you do. It's what you do that's important. Not how quickly you do stuff or how efficient you are. It's what you do. That's the key kind of force multiplier, the thing to focus on. So yeah, I do. I think we spend far too much time working, because I think actually if people really looked at what they were doing and looked at the things that really move the needle, they would significantly reduce their hours if they were allowed to. But you've got this kind of corporate, I guess, patriarchy that's kind of holding this arbitrary number of hours, whatever it is. I don't know what it is in the US, but it's 40 hours in the UK typically. And obviously you've got people working much, much more than that for little return, because they're stressed and they think that if they work hard, they get some kind of reward. Or, I'm sure it's the same in America, where you're based in the US, aren't you? Just to be clear. Yeah. Thank God I got that correct. But it's similar in the US, right? Like people, it's celebrated, right? Being busy and working long hours is celebrated, which is really sad and pathetic, because it's not actually productive. If you look at someone who works a 15-hour day, how many hours are they actually productive? You've probably got some exceptions to the rule. I always think Gary Vaynerchuk's quite interesting, because he seems to be very good intuitively at pattern recognition and choosing the right things to do, and then just putting in the work. I mean, the guy's a machine. But then again, he's trying to buy the New York Jets. I'm not sure if that's most people's goal. But, he's perhaps a rare exception, or someone who's kind of taken that Tim Ferriss, I'm going to 10x my per hour output point of view, but then he's multiplied that by 10, like every day. And he seems to be pretty good at that. But I think the average person isn't. So those are my thoughts on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this ties in a little bit with the fact that we're novelty-seeking creatures, and once you do the same spreadsheet a millionth time in the day, it's just going to get very repetitive. You're going to get burnt out and maybe even lose motivation. So let's go to hypothetical situations. Let's say I have no clue how to work out. How do I even begin?
That's a good question. I should stop saying that. That's a good question. That's just a filler to give me time to think of my answer. So I think anyone who has absolutely no idea how to start this type of exercise, there's the great thing about the US is you guys have got a lot of fantastic high intensity trainers. If you go to my website, that wasn't really an intentional plug, but a lot of the interviews I've done are with trainers all over the US. I mean, all of my listeners are pretty much in the US. So yeah, there's hopefully wherever you are listening to this, there's a high intensity trainer in your town, and it is growing. There are more and more trainers popping up who are very good at, trained in this specific discipline. So if you're a real newbie and a real beginner, then I would seek that out, because it can be quite challenging form of exercise, and it's incredibly helpful if you can find someone to actually personal train you and show you how to perform the exercises correctly, and also help assist you have a productive workout. It's well known if you're supervised, you always do better when it comes to exercise. I think that's down to something called the Hawthorne effect. And yeah, people will perform better if they're supervised, so they'll just have a more productive workout. If you can't, if you're in a unfortunate situation where maybe you live in a place where there isn't a high intensity trainer, personally, I think most personal trainers, like regular commercial gym PTs, are really awful and have no idea what they're talking about. So I would actually avoid them, because I think you're more likely to get injured if you work with someone who can't define what the word exercise is. So I know that sounds very mean and controversial, but that's just my opinion.
It's honest.
Yeah, that's it. And so I would seek out those trainers. But if you can't, in terms of high intensity trainers, but if you haven't got access, I would read Body by Science. It's a very, very simple exercise program in that book called The Big Five, and you can even search Body by Science Big Five on YouTube, and it's a very simple set of 5 exercises that I already listed previously, which are very, very simple to perform. I would always focus on machines first, because with machines form is easier and you don't have to think about as much in terms of balance and other things that you may need to think about when you're doing free weights or body weight, and it enables you to really just focus on the effort required to perform the workout. And in Body by Science as well, there's also a free weight demonstration or a free weight workout if you haven't got access to machines. So when I first, I'd been reading a lot about health and fitness and exercising and that kind of thing for a while leading up to Body by Science. So it was quite easy for me to take the book and implement it straight away. But that's because I came from, some experience. Whereas for someone who has absolutely no experience whatsoever and has never even touched a weight, obviously having a trainer is ideal. But, second to that, I would buy Body by Science and learn how to do this protocol and self-administer it. You'll absolutely, you'll be so happy that you did, because it'll be the best investment you ever make for your health. This is some fantastic literature coming out recently on the benefits of strength training for the elderly. There's one that recently came out showing, a marked improvement in cellular health for women. And I think, this is really interesting. There's another study that came out actually a few years ago now, showing strength training to be, I'm not sure if this was in the title, but people often use this study to suggest that strength training is the fountain of youth, which may be overstating it a little bit, but basically it helped reverse the expression in something like 196 genes and help reverse them to a youthful expression. So you call that epigenetics, where you can obviously change your genetic makeup through your environment and lifestyle, which is pretty amazing. Like the fact that strength training actually makes you younger is unbelievable. I remember seeing that study and posting it and being like, stop wasting all that money on skincare. Start doing strength training if you're not already, because that's actually going to keep you younger more than anything else. Obviously that combined with a healthy diet and so on is important too. But yeah, I think, there's plenty of people in their 80s and 90s doing this type of training. And it's always lovely when I see a video of like a 93-year-old woman doing, strength training. And again, like those people probably need some supervision, especially if they've not done it before, obviously. But it just shows, if people that age are, starting strength training, then so can you. I've obviously got, a podcast and a website that's full of resources, but I don't want to list too many things. I don't want to overwhelm the listeners, but honestly, Body by Science, if you YouTube and search Dr. Doug McGuff, you'll find some wonderful articles and videos from him. He's got plenty of speeches on YouTube that are quite frankly captivating. If you like me, if you're really passionate about health and fitness, you'll probably find it just as interesting as I did. and if the listeners are, listening to your podcast, obviously they're really into that stuff. So I think it will really, really resonate with them.
And so we've talked about the people that are 80s and 90s. Do they have any challenges to transition? Let's say I just got retired. I'm about 65, 70, and I've never worked out. So is supervision the only thing that they require? Do they need to be aware of something? Anything?
Yeah, I think for those people, I do think supervision is really, really important. So certainly the people above 70, I would be very cautious of self-administering something like this. In fact, I cover my ass. I wouldn't.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, so long as you've got, obviously, when someone is of that age, if they had, assuming, worst case scenario, they haven't ever done any resistance training, likely to have potentially some ailments, maybe some joint issues, maybe brittle bones, and the trainer will need to be very careful with that person. Although the thing is, and I know it doesn't sound like it, but high intensity strength training, and again, this is why really the listeners need to see it with their own eyes, is incredibly safe. Because if you're doing, for instance, if we're looking at the chest press, for example, if you're using a well-designed machine like a Med-X or Nautilus chest press, and you're pushing the chest press out slowly under control, and you're not using any ballistic or explosive movement, and you're going forward and back until you reach momentary muscular failure. And then just as you reach failure, you contract for maybe 5 to 10 seconds more. You attempt to move the resistance, but you can't. So then you slowly lower the weight back to starting position. And you have a trainer there to observe you do that. You're going to be perfectly fine. However, obviously, everyone is different. Everyone comes into this with different preconditions. And so most trainers will conduct some kind of functional screening test or some kind of functional movement test to ensure that people are going to be safe doing all these different movements. But the Big Five protocol, which I've already explained, is a very safe protocol for most people with planes of movement that everyone should be able to do well into old age.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say there are obvious caveats with the older population, and best to find a trainer who really knows what they're doing and has perhaps a good litmus test will be to see if they already have senior citizens within their clientele, and maybe speak to them would be an ideal way to go about it. But a lot of the high intensity trainers, from what I see in the US, are fantastic, and a lot of them have people in their 80s and 90s working with them. So yeah.
Well, here's a good one then. What about kids? How soon can we bring them to do some sort of strength training, and how do you introduce this concept to them?
Do you know what? I don't work with kids. I've interviewed people that do. I wouldn't want to make any assumptions to say you could train after 10, but obviously there's things to take into account, like natural maturation and natural muscular bone and organ development as kids get older. So it's a very, sensitive time. And I think, but from what I've learned listening to a lot of my guests on my show, is they train kids pretty young. So they train kids as soon as they're ready. If they're very young, they may struggle to cope with the intensity and being able to contract muscles sufficiently. But I have plenty of my guests' kids are training, and they're in their early teens, and some I think are even younger than that. But I wouldn't want to on your show say when you should get your kid to start training. I would again refer to a qualified high intensity trainer. I am not one currently. I am on the way to becoming one. I help clients with general advice and kind of body composition. But I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable right now saying you should train your kid from X age, if that's okay.
Okay, so here's some fun exercise we can do right now, and I'm gonna throw you off guard now. So I'm gonna make a bunch of excuses, and I want you to bust those excuses. So first excuse: I hate working out.
or do you hate being fat? Actually, that's a crap response, because training without a good diet isn't probably going to do a great deal. I hate working out. Well, I've got good news for you. High intensity strength training will only take you 10 to 15 minutes once or twice a week. So you won't be in the gym very long. And the upside is, with that tiny time investment, you will get many, many, many benefits in terms of improving your overall health, but also making you look much, much better. So if you're looking to attract the opposite sex, you will have more success in that department. And I think when people see the tremendous number of upsides from what is a tiny, tiny investment of time, they'll quickly realize that it's totally worth it and there's no going back.
Okay. Second excuse. I have no gym, or I don't want to go to the gym.
Well, actually, it depends on your level of motivation. But, I've for the last year or so, I've been doing purely body weight, high intensity training. All I have is a set of push-up handles, which, are redundant. You can even just do push-ups on the floor. I have an Iron Gym chin-up bar, and that's all I have. And that's all you need. You can get a very, very productive workout in from home with very minimal equipment. For example, you could do pull-ups, you can do push-ups, you can do rows from under a table, or you can get like a TRX and fold it over the top of a door and do inverted rows. You could do wall sits where you're sat against the wall as if you're sitting on a chair and driving your weight into your heels. That's an absolute killer. And then you could perhaps superset them with like a bodyweight squat. We are moving through a normal squatting motion just with body weight very, very slowly, which has then obviously been pre-fatigued by a wall sit. So that's a workout you can do with no equipment whatsoever, hardly any investment. Obviously, there is some equipment in terms of the chin-up bar, but it's a tiny, tiny investment. So yeah, there's no excuse. You can use body weight, free weights, or machines. It really doesn't matter. Machines are just easier. That's all.
Oh wait, I have excuses. Sorry.
Bring it.
I feel insecure going to the gym.
Ooh, okay. Well, actually, this is kind of cool, right? So what I quite like about high intensity trainers in the US is a lot of them are very anti-commercial gyms. So they hate the fact that there's mirrors everywhere. They hate the fact that gyms are full of bulky meatheads. And there's typically really loud music, lots and lots of distraction. And what a lot of trainers do, what a lot of high intensity trainers do in their gyms is they will deliberately have no mirrors, apart from maybe a mirror in the changing room or something like that. No music, so that the participant can be completely focused on the workout. They'll have one-on-one instruction, so they have someone guiding them through the whole thing. There won't be usually many more people in there. I mean, a lot of these places just do one-on-one. So it's very, very contrasting, or very, very different, I should say, to the typical gym, which most people hate. And I completely understand that. I actually quite like the gym, but sometimes I don't like the environment. If it's like, what I just described, it can be quite off-putting, especially when you're trying to focus or when you have to wait for someone to get off a machine so that you can get on it. That's a nightmare, especially when you're trying to get your workout done quickly. So, yeah, if you hate the gym, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you join a high-intensity training gym, or at least have a lot of them do like free introduction training session, so free introductory sessions. So but then if you really, really don't even want to do that, which I think would be kind of foolish if I'm honest, then you can do it at home, which I've already obviously described how to do.
I think you've busted my next excuse, which is I don't like creepy guys staring at me.
What type of creepy guys? Like the meathead guys?
I don't know. I'm just pulling stuff out, man.
But yeah, well, obviously, like I said, if you're training in one of these like high intensity training studios, you won't have many more people in there. In fact, the funny thing is even though this type of training is going to stimulate just as good responses in terms of strength and muscle gain as many other resistance training protocols that people do, the high intensity training gyms really attract a certain clientele. They tend to be typically quite affluent and typically older. So yeah, you find that actually you won't have you won't necessarily be surrounded by those types of people.
Okay, here's an interesting question for you, which is, what do you think about the calorie tracking and consistently measuring biomarkers? Do you do that, or do you recommend that, or do you like to keep it simple?
I was going to ask you the same question. That's great. I've really challenged my thinking about this recently. So I've always been the latter, so not tracking. I like to consume what I believe are healthy foods. And I tend to really prioritize protein. So protein is like the macro, if you will, that I try and prioritize. I'm pretty, having spoken, obviously you've interviewed Sean Baker, so you know this. Having interviewed Sean, he's had a huge influence on my diet. At the moment, I'm very carnivore. I'm eating 2 to 3 steaks a day. I tend to do intermittent fasting and then eat 2 big meals. I've never been as ripped doing it this way. Like, it's been really, really effective for me. I don't count calories. Someone did actually ask me, how many calories do you eat per day? And I was like, I did actually sit down and work it out. And it's actually just around maintenance. And that's really interesting because, again, assuming that I've worked out maintenance correctly, which, I probably need to double check. But it was like, oh, I did that naturally. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't count calories to do maintenance. I just ate nutrient-dense foods, prioritized protein, and naturally I ate what I needed. And I do have carbs. I do tend to have rice or potato in the evening, in my evening meal, but that's probably about it. So it's relatively low carb-ish. But recently I had a conversation with a trainer in the UK called Gary Knight. And he's going to actually be on that's going to go live on my show probably in sort of January, February. Fascinating guy, very, very good trainer. And he's all about measuring like calories. Like, when he consults with his clients, he gets them to, screenshot MyFitnessPal and send hit a calorie target and then send that every day. And that works for him and it works for his clients, and that's great. But I don't know, for me right now, I feel like it's almost like another stressor, like another thing to think about, another to do. And I am thinking about doing sort of another N=1 soon. I've just finished doing Sean Baker's 100 push-up challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So I was helping him, sort of participating in his N=many research experiment. And now I've done that, and I'm now interested in getting back into my own training regime, and then also upping my calories and protein intake to see if I can move the needle in terms of muscle gain. So I am going to be tracking for the sake of that, but it's not something I plan to do lifelong. The big question, though, is, do calories matter? And obviously I'm not interviewing you now, but I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Because I get so confused. I've had Dr. Ted Naiman on my show. I've obviously read a load of stuff. I've read both sides, and I don't know. I think I'll be honest, I think I'm in a position now currently, and I'm prepared to change my opinion, where calorie balance does matter a lot. But I do think that if we focus on eating just calories and you eat too many carbs, then you're likely to be more hungry because they tend not to be as nutrient dense. And I think protein tends to be more satiating. So I just think low carb almost becomes a byproduct as opposed to the main goal for me. But yeah, I'm just, I thought about this before we jumped on because I was like, oh, he's going to ask me about that. And I haven't really formulated a proper opinion because, to be honest, I don't really know. I'm sitting here right now staring at something I printed out. It's an article called "The Contradictions and Cognitive Dissonance: The Kevin Hall Effect." And this is, I think it's Michael Eads, the author of Protein Power. Mm-hmm. This is his kind of analysis of Kevin Hall's research that he did with Gary Taubes.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and just on the surface, I haven't finished reading it yet, but just on the surface, what I thought was quite fascinating was that there was an increase of 50 calories per day in terms of energy expenditure when on the high fat diet. And I think that's really compelling. I think 50 calories a day more burnt through eating fat rather than carbs. If you compound that over a long period of time, that's significant. Maybe I've not understood the whole picture, and I'm straw manning that a little bit. But I'm intrigued. I'm very fascinated by this whole debate, and I don't even fully understand it. I understand some of the mechanisms, but what I've come to realize, I don't know what you think about this, is that I know this is kind of odd to have this conversation because you often talk to people who actually know what they're talking about, which is that, I used to think, you eat carbs, you spike insulin, you get fat. Like, that's end of story. But I think the problem is a lot of these mechanisms, they're true in isolation, but it's a very, very complex makeup. And there's lots and lots of other different processes happening. And they all kind of work together. And I don't think people are sometimes smart enough to kind of consider the bigger picture. And I think that's where the problem is with this stuff. So that's just where I'm at in terms of diet.
Yeah. See, if I start talking and we pry this topic further, this podcast is going to create huge comment boxes where we're going to get shredded.
I'm already going to get shredded. My comment just there.
Yeah, but here's the interesting question that we're going to be delving into one of our podcasts on is this whole keto buzz, this whole low carb. Are we just moving away from a vegetarian or vegetable or a high plant-based diet to just a carnivorous diet? Because from what it seems, the carnivorous diet, even in our community, in our Ketogeek community, we have this somewhat approach we call the nutty carnivore approach. We haven't publicly told people about it, but behind the scenes, that's what we do. That's the nickname of the diet we sort of follow, which is start from zero carbs, start from a carnivorous framework, and add supplemental foods or any of those things to it. So you're adding carbs. Now, the traditional method is you eliminate carbs, you eliminate things. Ours is... the second approach that we use is a complete rebuild approach. So that's what we've been working on. We haven't made it public because everybody's going to go crazy about it. And now, since I've already mentioned it on our podcast, it probably might go a little crazy. So do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I will. I mean, what might be interesting is I wanted to share kind of the diet that's worked for me best.
Go for it.
Since I've changed lifestyle, and I actually moved to Ireland. I moved to Galway in Ireland and left my job in IT to focus on my business full time. And in so doing, I actually discovered the 2 meal a day intermittent fasting thing kind of by accident, because we first moved over here and lived with my partner's mum. And it was far more convenient for me to have 2 meals a day during that time, because it was a small house. We were kind of in each other's way. I didn't want to be cooking all the time and that type of thing. So 2 meals a day was kind of by accident. And I was eating, some days I wasn't eating very well. I was eating kind of bad food. And I would just kind of, look in the mirror and be like, whoa, I still look pretty ripped. Like, I don't look like I've put on a lot of weight. And yeah, I had like loads of ice cream yesterday or whatever. And obviously, people can look at that and go, oh, well, that's because of calories and you're eating less because you're only having 2 meals rather than 3. And I'm like, yeah, perhaps you're correct. But anyway, I then moved to Galway, which is a city in Ireland, and kind of embraced this. And I just started doing intermittent fasting till kind of 1-ish in the afternoon, and then would have my first meal. My first meal is typically, and I like to keep it the same just for simplicity, a steak and a 4-egg omelette. That's what I have. And I cook it in coconut oil, and I fry it. And then I have an evening meal, which is typically a steak or 2, a white potato or rice, and then maybe broccoli or green beans. So I have very little fruit and vegetables in my diet. And I've really, really seen no downside to doing that, which is obviously incredibly controversial. But I just think that, red meat seems to offer far more in the way of overall nutrients and essentials than vegetables do. But
yeah, man, that's interesting. So that basically, it just makes you question everything and undermines everything we know about food and nutrition.
Pretty much.
Yeah. When we were done with the podcast with Sean Baker, we just literally sat in our places, looked at each other's faces for about 2 weeks, and we just lost it. What's going on? What just hit us? That's what we were thinking. It was crazy, and we are about to do a podcast. We probably already have by the time this is coming out, with Paleo Medicina, who use a meat-based diet to combat even some of the complicated diseases such as cancer. So the thing that has been told throughout history that causes cancer, if it can fight cancer, then makes you question a lot of things that we've been taught.
Yeah. Do you ever bring on like the counter view onto your podcast? Like, are you? Because I see mostly like kind of the keto carnivore types on your show. Would you consider bringing on someone who's like completely the opposite and having kind of an open debate?
What I would love to bring on is someone who actually may be vegan, and even if they're not ketogenic, they might have a tool to help people. Like in certain cases, maybe there's a ketolytic disease, in which it is further propagated by ketone bodies. Then people need to have these tools. It's important to get them the access to some of this information. So I'm very open to it. In fact, when we started Ketogeek, we were vegetarianish sort of approach. In fact, we were open to creating vegan products. But as we learned more about it, we realized that we should not be demonizing meat. But who knows? We are totally open to it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really sometimes difficult to not become biased to one approach and always try and retain an open mind. I find that quite challenging. It's like Sean's constantly sharing literature on Twitter and tweeting about stuff about carnivore, and I'm kind of like, yeah, all the power to him, go Sean. But at the same time, I'm realizing I become more and more biased if I do that, and I try and sort of catch myself and try and read and listen to the other side, and try and see where the differences are and where the commonalities are, which is quite fascinating actually to see when you see both sides, I think. With regard to like low carb, high fat and stuff like that, and high carb.
And there's this one thing that I also wanted to add here is the human experience aspect of it, where, hey, what happened to maybe adding a little bit of carbs for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of bonding time? So like people drink wine, maybe you could have a meal here and there. Should that be demonized as well because we want to go carnivorous? So that's some of the questions that I have that are a little skeptical of the zero carb sort of approach. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, we are getting close to our finishing period. So one question I wanted to ask you, I think it's very important, is how do you figure out if a coach or a trainer is good or bad? I mean, we delved a little bit into it. What are some of the gauges that you can use?
Good question. So there isn't, unfortunately, high intensity strength training isn't, unless they've gone through the Super Slow Guild, which is something founded by Ken Hutchins back in the day, but I think it's morphed into something else now, and it might not be the sign of a good trainer. In terms of not that they would be a bad trainer if they had that accreditation, but I'm not sure if it's as meaningful now. But unfortunately, from what I understand, there's not that, so high intensity strength training isn't recognized under like the NSCA or any of these other, I'm trying to think of the other kind of American personal training bodies. I know it's not in the UK, which is unfortunate. And I don't know why that is. It's probably bureaucratic, political reason. I'm not quite sure. Or just a lack of understanding. But effectively it is just blimmin' strength training at the end of the day. But I think you can feel pretty safe. Like if you go to a high intensity training clinic, I'm just trying to think what to kind of look out for. If you've listened to this interview, you'll grasp or have an understanding of what I deem as high intensity training. And when you see someone's website about their business, you'll be able to map that against what you've heard on this show. And that should help you identify the right trainer. Another good way of figuring them out is there's a wonderful high intensity training certification course or courses provided by hituni.com. And I'm actually partway through a course with them. Full disclosure, I do actually, they are an affiliate I am an affiliate of them, I should say. But they're the only, from my understanding, current online course provider for high intensity training courses. So if you find a trainer and they've been accredited through that, then they're likely to be very skilled. But I don't think that's essential. I think I haven't really seen any really bad high intensity training gyms in the US. I think anyone who started that gym it's a difficult endeavor. They have to obviously put the money down to start a studio. And I think like 99% of people that do it are very passionate about that way of exercising. So they're very likely to be skilled in delivering that to their clients. I guess, if you try and find a high intensity training place that's well established to be a good fit, if somewhere's been around for a few years and you can see they've got quite a few clients, and that's obviously a good sign versus a startup. So those are just some things I would consider, but the real you'll know, like as soon as if you map what you've heard on this show and then map that against a trainer's advert in their window or have a conversation with them and see what they say. If you read if you read Body by Science, you'll understand this training really, really well if you read that book. And it will just give you I think if there's one health and fitness book everyone should read, it's that book. I don't mean just read that book and nothing else, but if you're not like a health and fitness geek like you and I, Fahad, I think that's the go-to book in my opinion. And if people read that book, they'll be able to spot the good from the bad.
And when should people reach out to you? When should they email you?
Whenever, immediately. Like I'm always happy to converse with people over email. Mike, do you want me to should I drop my details in if people want to?
Well, I had one question. I had one question before we do that. Have you seen Lord of the Rings, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, quick question: Rohan or Gondor?
Oh, Rohan.
Oh man, Rohan, Team Rohan.
Is that bad?
No, that's a choice. I'm not judging, man. Anyway,
Gondor's like the men in the kind of Gondor I associate with. Was it Boromir's father? And can't remember his name. I can't remember. But I just remember him being a bit of a crazy person. And Gondor being quite arrogant, so that's why I went Rohan. All
right, okay, but yeah, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, if you go to corporatewarrior.org, that will actually redirect you to a page of all of my podcast episodes. So there's actually, when this goes live, there'll probably be over 110 episodes, and they're all like health and fitness, business, productivity podcast episodes with world-class experts. So check that out there. If you want to contact me, email me. It's lneal, that's LN for November, EAL2 at gmail.com. And people can email me questions or what have you. I'm on the social media too. If you look up Corporate Warrior, you'll find me there. But again, I just want to leave you a few breadcrumbs and not overwhelm people. Like whenever someone's on my show and they say like, yeah, I'm on YouTube and Instagram, but I'm like if someone's driving or cycling, are they really going to remember all that? So I try to leave just the one or two things,
Oh, it sounds fantastic. I think we've covered up all bases. Do you have anything for the people? If not, I think that's about it.
I've said enough, and I'm so grateful for you having me on the show. I've really enjoyed it, Fahad. It's been good fun.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at Ketogeek.com to check out our premium, keto-friendly, and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to ketogeek.com/signup to join the low carb playground.